There's a language to the wilderness. Most people think it's a language of sound, the howl of the wind through the pines, the snap of a twig under a heavy paw, the distant cry of a hawk circling on a thermal. And it is. But the more time you spend in the truly deep, untouched places of the world, the more you realize that its true language is silence. There's the heavy, watchful silence of a forest when a large predator is moving through. There's the profound, almost sacred silence of a mountaintop at dawn, before the world has woken. These are natural silences. They have weight, meaning. They speak volumes. But there is another kind of silence, an unnatural one, the kind that doesn't belong. It's a hollow, empty silence that seems to absorb sound, to drink the life out of the air. It's the silence of something wrong. And when you find that kind of silence in a human being, it's the most terrifying sound in the world. Welcome back to the Wilderness Protocol. The story I'm about to share with you tonight isn't one of our typical encounters with unexplained creatures or strange phenomena observed from a distance. This one is different. This story followed us home. It began with a rescue mission, a life saved from the very brink. But it ended with a question that still haunts my quietest hours. It's the story of a man we pulled from the clutches of the mountain. A man whose silence was louder and more terrifying than any scream. And it's about the message he brought back with him. Not with his voice, but from the deep, dark place behind his eyes, a frantic, desperate message, tapped out in the dead of night against the enamel of his own teeth. This is the story of the hiker who hasn't spoken a word, and the chilling Morse code he tapped while he slept. Our story begins 3 weeks ago. It was late autumn, that brief, beautiful period when the Sierra Nevada is painted in strokes of gold and rust before the heavy snows come to bury it all in white. My team and I were on the final leg of a routine 3-day patrol, charting trail erosion and checking on emergency supply caches in the backcountry. There are 3 of us. There's Marcus, our lead tracker. He's a former Marine, a man who says maybe 20 words a day but can read a story in a single broken branch or a scuff mark on a rock. His instincts are legendary. Then there's Chloe. She's our medic, sharp as a tack and steady as a rock. She's the pragmatist, the one who trusts data and vitals over gut feelings. And then there's me. I'm the team lead and a former signals intelligence analyst from my time in the military. A job that taught me to find patterns in the noise, to listen for the message hidden beneath the static. A skill I thought I'd left behind long ago. We were tired, looking forward to a hot meal and a soft bed, when the call came in. It crackled over the satellite phone, a voice laced with static and urgency from the Regional Park Service dispatcher. A solo hiker was overdue, 48 hours overdue. His name was Alex Thompson, late 20s. His emergency contact information described him as an experienced solo adventurer, meticulous in his planning. But as anyone who spends time out here knows, the mountain doesn't care about your resume. It's indifferent to your experience and your intentions. His intended route was ambitious and, frankly, foolish for a solo hiker at this time of year. It was a lesser-used trail that snaked its way through a series of 5 jagged, granite peaks we call the Knuckles. It's a notoriously disorienting area. The trails are poorly marked, the weather can turn on a dime, and the landscape has a way of making you feel very, very small. To make matters worse, a powerful and unseasonably violent weather front was moving in from the west. The official search and rescue teams were mobilizing on the ground, but the high winds and dropping cloud ceiling had made any kind of aerial search impossible. They were hours away from the trailhead. We looked at our map. His last known coordinates, logged by his GPS beacon 2 days prior, were less than a 5-hour hike from our current position. We were closer. We were the only real chance he had. Duty in the wilderness is a simple, heavy thing. You don't question it. We acknowledged the call, changed our course immediately, and headed east, deeper into the mountains. The golden afternoon light suddenly seemed colder, the shadows stretching out like long, grasping fingers. The hike to the Knuckles was grueling. The easy trail gave way to a steep, arduous scramble over loose scree and weathered granite boulders the size of small cars. The air grew still and thin. One of the unsettling things about the Knuckles is how it seems to swallow sound. The normal chatter of birds, the buzz of insects, it all just fades away. You're left with nothing but the crunch of your boots on the gravel, the sound of your own breathing, and the low, constant moan of the wind as it scrapes against the peaks above. It's a place that feels profoundly ancient and utterly ambivalent to human life. Chloe was tracking the approaching storm on her tablet, her face grim. "It's moving faster than they forecast," she yelled over the rising gale. "We've got a 2-hour window, tops, before this entire ridge becomes a death trap. If he's up here, we need to find him now." It was Marcus who spotted the sign. He's a man of few words, but his eyes missed nothing. He stopped, pointing not up towards the peaks, but down, towards a dark, narrow ravine that scarred the mountainside. It was a deep fissure, choked with the skeletons of fallen pines and shadowed, moss-covered boulders. "The wind," he grunted, his voice snatched away by the gale. If he was caught in it, he would have gone in there for cover. Only logical place. It was a grim thought. That ravine was a natural funnel. A rockslide or a flash flood would turn it into a tomb. But he was right. It was the most logical place to look. We began our careful descent, calling his name, our voices feeling small and useless, immediately swallowed by the wind and the oppressive silence of the place. We found him just as the first stinging pellets of icy rain began to fall from the bruised purple sky. He wasn't deep in the ravine, but just above it, as if he tried to crawl out and failed. He was wedged into a small crevice between two enormous slabs of granite, almost perfectly camouflaged. His clothes were the same drab, earthy tones as the rock and dirt around him. We almost walked right past him. It was a tiny scrap of synthetic blue from the tattered remains of his backpack that caught Marcus's eye. As we scrambled over to him, the desperation of his situation became horrifyingly clear. He was alive, but only just. His eyes were open, but they were wide, unfocused, and staring at something far beyond us, beyond the mountain itself. His face was a hollow mask of suffering. His skin stretched taut over his cheekbones, his lips cracked and tinged with blue. His leg was the worst part. It was bent at a sickening, unnatural angle below the knee. A compound fracture. The jagged end of the bone was a stark, obscene white against the bloody ruin of his trousers. He'd attempted to fashion a crude splint from a tree branch and strips of his own shirt, a testament to his will to survive. But it was a pathetic defense against such a grievous injury. Chloe was by his side in an instant, her professionalism a calm island in the rising storm. "Sir, can you hear me? My name is Chloe. I'm a paramedic. We're here to help you." He didn't respond. He didn't blink. His gaze remained fixed, locked on some invisible point in the gray, swirling sky. His breathing was a faint, shallow rasp. Severe shock and dehydration, advanced hypothermia, and a nasty, badly infected fracture. Chloe reported, her hands moving with the swift, practiced efficiency of a master at her craft. She checked his vitals, covered him with an emergency thermal blanket, and prepped in 4. "He's lost a lot of blood. He's running on fumes. We need to get him down. Now." Getting him out was a choreographed nightmare. We had to strap his unresponsive body to a portable stretch-era dead weight of almost 180 pounds and haul him up out of that gully and then down the treacherous mountain slope. And all of this in near total darkness, as the storm finally broke over us in its full, unrestrained fury. Rain and sleet lashed down, turning the ground to slick, ankle-deep mud and treacherous ice. Every step was a calculated risk, a gamble against gravity and the mountain itself. And through all of its jostling, the maneuvering of his shattered leg, the biting cold, our rescued hiker, Alex Thompson, remained utterly, unnervingly silent. He didn't cry out when we had to adjust the straps over his broken leg. He didn't groan or whimper or make any sound at all. His eyes, when they occasionally flickered towards us in the beam of our headlamps, were like dark, empty windows into a vacant house. There was no recognition, no fear, no pain, and most unnervingly, no relief. There was nothing. It was the most profound absence of reaction I have ever witnessed in a human being in that much pain. It was as if the man we were carrying was just a shell, the person who lived inside it long since departed, leaving only the empty vessel behind. We stumbled back into our base cabin just before dawn, exhausted beyond measure, soaked to the bone, but successful. The storm raged outside, trapping us, a small pocket of light and warmth in a world of violent chaos. Chloe had stabilized Alex. She'd cleaned and dressed his wound as best she could, and he was hooked up to fluids and painkillers. Now, all we could do was wait for the weather to break so a medevac helicopter could get in. We laid him on a cot near the fireplace. His breathing was deeper now, more regular. The color was slowly returning to his face. By all accounts, it was a successful rescue, a victory. But as I sat there that night, watching him by the flickering firelight, I couldn't shake a deep and unsettling feeling. It didn't feel like we had brought him out of the darkness. It felt like he had brought a piece of the darkness back with him. The silence was the first sign, but it was what came next, in the quiet, desperate hours of that first night, that would begin to turn our relief into a slow, creeping dread. It started with a sound so small, so subtle, I was sure at first that I was imagining it, that it was just my own exhaustion playing tricks on me. Faint, rhythmic clicking. I sat up straighter in my chair, straining my ears over the crackle of the logs in the fireplace and the howl of the wind against the cabin walls. There it was again. Click, 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 click. It was coming from him, from the cot. I leaned closer, my heart beginning to thump a slow, heavy rhythm in my chest. He was fast asleep, his face slack with exhaustion and the sedatives Chloe had given him. But his jaw was not relaxed. It was subtly tense, and under his parted, cracked lips, his teeth were gently, almost imperceptibly, tapping against each other. It wasn't a random spasm, not the chattering of someone who was cold. This was different. It had a pattern, cadence, a rhythm that felt deliberate, intelligent, and utterly out of place. Marcus, who had been dozing in a chair on the other side of the fire, opened his eyes. He looked at me, a silent question in his gaze. He'd heard it too. My mind, conditioned by years of training I hadn't used in over a decade, started to work automatically, listening, analyzing, searching for the pattern beneath the noise. And I found it. It wasn't a random clicking. It wasn't a symptom of shock. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was hearing a message. Our rescued hiker, the man who wouldn't or couldn't speak a single word, was lying on the cot, deep in an unconscious state, and he was tapping out Morse code on his teeth while he slept. The first night in that cabin was an eternity. The storm didn't let up. If anything, it seemed to intensify, wrapping our small outpost in a furious cocoon of wind and driving snow. The windows rattled in their frames with each powerful gust, and the fire spat and hissed, casting long, dancing shadows that turned familiar shapes into menacing figures. It felt as though the world outside had completely vanished, leaving only the three of us and our silent, sleeping guest, sealed in a bubble of anxious warmth. After the initial, jarring shock of discovering the tapping sound, Marcus and I just watched him for a while. Chloe was asleep in the adjoining room, utterly spent after the physical and mental toll of the rescue and the initial medical treatment. We made a silent pact not to wake her. Not yet. What would we even say? The patient we just saved is communicating in his sleep by clicking his teeth? It sounded like something born of extreme fatigue and shared paranoia, a symptom of our own exhaustion. But the sound was undeniable. It was real. Click, click, click. Click, 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 click. It was faint, a tiny, sharp sound in the otherwise tumultuous symphony of the storm. But it was persistent. The rhythm was halting, strange, broken by long pauses as if the sender was struggling to remember the sequence, or perhaps was being interrupted. S.O.S.? Marcus whispered from his chair, his voice rough with sleep and disbelief. He wasn't a signals expert, but every woodsman, every soldier, knows the most famous sequence of them all. It's the first one you look for. I shook my head, my eyes fixed on the subtle but deliberate movement of Alex's jaw beneath his skin. No, I whispered back, my own voice tight. It's not SOS. The pauses are wrong. The cadence. It's something else. My past life, the one before all this, came rushing back. The years spent in dark, windowless rooms, wearing headphones, listening to the hidden language of radio waves. My mind, even after all this time, still has the muscle memory. It recognizes the fundamental patterns of dots and dashes, the building blocks of communication. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and stiff with cold and fatigue. I opened a notes app, the bright white screen feeling like a violation, an intrusion of the modern world into this primal scene. I held it low in my lap, shielded from the cot, and my thumb hovered over the keyboard. I began the maddening process of transcription. A period for a short click, a dot, a hyphen for a slightly longer one, a dash. It was infuriatingly difficult. The clicks were so soft, often lost in a sudden hiss from the fire or a rattle of the window pane. The pauses between letters were inconsistent, and the gaps between what I assumed were words were long and erratic. Sometimes the sequence would stop altogether for a full minute, and just as I'd think it was over, a random spasm perhaps, it would start again. It was like trying to read a single, torn page from a book, with most of the words water-damaged and illegible. After what felt like an hour, I had a jumble of letters that made no sense. A chaotic alphabet soup. But then, a short, recognizable pattern emerged from the noise. I typed ITS. A long pause followed. My heart was thumping a heavy rhythm against my ribs. Then another sequence, IN, and another MY. My thumb froze. ITSINMY. I looked up from the screen at the unconscious man on the cot. His face was slack, peaceful even, a mask of sleep. But inside, a frantic message was being painstakingly assembled, one agonizing click at a time. ITSINMY. The tapping started again, more frantic this time, faster, as if the sender knew he was running out of time. Then a long pause. My mind raced through the possibilities. Hand? Heart? The clicking resumed, sharp, insistent. ID. My thumb typed the letters, but my brain was already ahead of it. The words solidified on the screen, stark and terrifying in the cold blue light of the phone. HEAD. I slowly lifted my gaze to Marcus. He had moved his chair closer, his face a mask of intense concentration in the firelight. He met my eyes and I knew he had pieced it together too. "It's in my head," he breathed, the words barely audible, instantly swallowed by the sound of the storm. A chill, colder and more profound than the storm outside could ever produce, snaked its way down my spine and settled deep in my bones. This wasn't a distress call in the traditional sense. This wasn't a hiker describing his location or his injuries. This was something else entirely. Something intimate, internal, and deeply, deeply wrong. The tapping continued, but it became weaker, more erratic, as if the effort was becoming too much. I transcribed, "Getitout," and then silence. The clicking stopped. His jaw went slack. His breathing evened out into the deep, untroubled rhythm of a truly deep sleep. The message was over. For now. Marcus and I sat there for another hour, maybe more. We didn't speak. We just listened to the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind. The storm, our only companion. The words I had typed on my phone seemed to burn a hole in my pocket. "It's in my head. Get it out." What could it possibly mean? My logical mind desperately searched for a rational explanation. It had to be a delusion, a phantom born of trauma. The shock, the pain, the severe hypothermia. Chloe had told us that the human mind, when pushed to its absolute breaking point, can do bizarre things to protect itself. Can create narratives, build walls, invent enemies. A man breaks his leg, starves, freezes for days on a mountain. His mind, in an effort to cope with the overwhelming physical agony, creates a focal point for the pain. An intruder, a monster in his own head. It made a grim, clinical kind of sense. But it didn't feel logical. The precision of the code, however halting and sloppy, felt deliberate. It felt like a genuine, desperate attempt to communicate something he was physically incapable of saying out loud. A warning, perhaps, but a warning about what? Morning finally came, gray and subdued. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world transformed, blanketed in a thick, wet, heavy layer of snow. The sky was the color of lead, and the silence outside was absolute, profound. Chloe was up first, all business, immediately checking on her patient. Alex was awake, or at least his eyes were open. He was exactly as we had found him on the mountain, staring, vacant, and utterly unresponsive. Chloe checked his vitals, changed the dressing on his leg. She tried talking to him, her voice the epitome of gentle, professional reassurance. "Good morning, Alex. The storm has passed. You're safe now. We should have a helicopter here for you in a few hours. Can you tell me your name? Do you know where you are?" Nothing. Not a flicker of recognition. Not a single blink of acknowledgement. Just that same unnerving, empty stare into the middle distance. He refused food, his jaw clamped shut, and she had to maintain the foredrip to keep him hydrated and nourished. While Marcus was outside, trying to get a clear signal on the sat phone, I pulled Chloe aside. With a deep breath, I showed her the Notes app on my phone. She read my frantic transcription, her brow furrowed in deep concentration. She scrolled up and down, her clinical gaze analyzing the words. Then she looked at me, her expression a mixture of skepticism and medical curiosity. "Morse code? Are you absolutely sure?" "I'm positive," I said, my voice firm. "I spent 4 years of my life listening to this stuff. The rhythm, the spacing, the sloppy like it's being sent under duress, but it's there." He did this for almost 2 hours last night. She was quiet for a long moment, processing it through her medical filter. Chloe is a creature of science and medicine. She sees the world in terms of symptoms, diagnoses, and treatments. "It's a somatic delusion," she said finally, her tone clinical and certain. "His mind has fixated on a perceived internal threat. It's in my head. It's a classic psychological response to extreme trauma. His brain is trying to personify the pain and fear." She paused, tapping a finger on her chin. "The tapping, that's more unusual. It's likely a form of psychomotor agitation, an unconscious, repetitive physical action that's giving his anxiety an outlet. The fact that it resembles Morse code could be a coincidence, or it could be related to a past experience or skill he has." "Did the Park Service find out anything about his background?" "Just that he's a software engineer," I replied. "They're still trying to reach his sister." "Well," she said, handing the phone back to me with an air of finality, "it's fascinating from a clinical perspective, but it's not a monster, it's a symptom. His brain is broken and it's trying to make sense of the damage. The best thing we can do for him is keep him stable until we can get him to a real hospital. He needs intensive psychiatric care, not an exorcist." Her explanation made perfect logical sense. It was rational, scientific, and in its own way reassuring. It took the creeping, supernatural dread of the night before and placed it neatly into a sterile box labeled Psychology 101. I wanted to believe it. I truly, desperately wanted to believe that was all it was. But as I watched our patient lying there, a silent statue in a world of his own, I couldn't shake the memory of the sheer, raw desperation in that tapping. It hadn't felt like a symptom. It had felt like a prisoner, rattling the bars of his cage from the inside, using the only tool he had left. Later that morning, Marcus finally got a clear signal. The weather had lifted enough for a medevac helicopter. They gave us an ETA of 2 hours. A wave of palpable relief washed over the cabin. Our part in this was almost over. Soon, Alex Thompson would be someone else's problem. He would be in a bright, sterile hospital, surrounded by doctors and machines that could perhaps understand his silent language better than we ever could. The rhythmic chop-chop-chop of the helicopter blades grew from a distant pulse to a roaring thunder that shook the cabin. We strapped him securely to the transport stretcher. Marcus and I carried him out into the blinding white snow, the downdraft from the chopper whipping a vortex of snow and ice into our faces. As we were hooking the stretcher to the winch line, for the first time since we found him, Alex moved with purpose. His head, which had been lolling lifelessly to the side, snapped straight. His eyes, those vacant, empty pools, suddenly focused. They weren't empty anymore. They locked directly onto mine. For a single, stunning heartbeat, I felt a jolt, a connection. The shell was gone. Someone was home, and that someone was filled with a desperate, pleading intelligence. There was a frantic, terrifying urgency in his eyes. His mouth opened, as if to finally speak. A dry, rasping sound, the first vocalization he had made, escaped his throat. And then the moment was shattered. The flight medic from the helicopter leaned over him, deftly placing an oxygen mask over his face. The stretcher was hoisted up into the belly of the roaring machine. The door slid shut, and just like that, he was gone. As the helicopter became a disappearing speck in the vast, blue sky, I stood there in the snow, the profound silence of the mountain rushing back in to fill the void. Chloe and Marcus were already heading back to the cabin, ready to pack up, ready to put this all behind them. But I couldn't move. I was replaying that last moment in my mind, over and over. The look in his eyes, the raw sound from his throat. It wasn't just a random noise. It was a word, or the desperate, aborted attempt at one. I felt a cold certainty crystallize deep in my gut, a certainty that defied all logic and medical reason. Chloe was wrong. Her neat, clinical explanation was wrong. It wasn't a delusion. There was something in Alex's head. And in that last, fleeting moment of contact, I had seen its face. It was sheer abject terror. The thing inside him wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, and it was terrified of being found. We spent the rest of that day cleaning the cabin, packing our gear, and preparing for the hike out at first light. There was a sense of finality in the air, the kind that comes after a difficult job is done. The conversation was light, focused on hot showers and real food. We talked about everything except Alex Thompson. It was an unspoken agreement. The file was closed. He was in the hands of professionals now. But I couldn't let it go. That night, I found myself unable to sleep. The image of Alex's eyes locking with mine was burned into my memory. The frantic intelligence I'd seen there, however brief, contradicted everything Chloe had said. It wasn't the look of a man lost in a delusion. It was the look of a prisoner staring through the bars of his cell. I got up from my bunk, careful not to wake the others. The cabin was quiet except for the low hum of the generator. I took my laptop to the main table and, using the cabin's satellite internet, I started digging. I began with Alex Thompson. The Park Service had managed to get in touch with his sister, and a few basic details had been logged in the official report, which I could access through our remote server. Alex Thompson, 28, a software engineer from San Francisco. No history of mental illness. His sister described him as quiet and introverted, but stable. He was an experienced outdoorsman, meticulous in his planning. This wasn't some amateur who had wandered off-trail. Something had gone profoundly wrong. Then I started researching the area where we found him. The Knuckles. Most of the information was geological. Formations, rock types, established climbing routes. But as I dug deeper, into local forums, hiker blogs, and archived news articles, a different picture began to emerge. There were stories. Of course, there are always stories in places like this. Tales of hikers vanishing without a trace, far more than the Park Service officially acknowledged. Reports of strange sounds in the night, chattering or clicking noises that people dismissed as rocks settling or animal calls. One blog post from a hiker a few years back gave me a pause. He described a feeling of being watched in the Knuckles, a sense of a profound and hostile intelligence in the rocks themselves. He called the place the Silent Teeth because of the jagged, tooth-like peaks against the skyline. He cut his trip short, vowing never to return. It was all anecdotal campfire stuff, easy to dismiss, but it created a pattern, a context for the strangeness we had experienced. The most disturbing discovery came from a digitized archive of a local newspaper from the 1930s. The headline read, "Prospector found mad, speaks only in taps." My blood ran cold. I clicked the link. The article was short and grainy. It described how a gold prospector named Jedediah Slade was found wandering near the base of the Knuckles, emaciated and incoherent. He had lost the ability to speak, but would constantly tap on any available Surfacia tin cup, a wooden table, his own teeth in what the reporter called a frantic, coded rhythm. He was committed to a state asylum, where he died a year later, never having spoken another word. The official cause of death was listed as exhaustion. Speaks only in taps. The coincidence was too great, too specific. I felt a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. This wasn't just Alex. This had happened before. I was so engrossed in my research that I almost didn't hear it. A notification ping on my laptop. It was an email from Chloe. The subject line was just one word: listen. I opened it. There was no text, just an audio file attached. I fumbled for my headphones, not wanting to wake Marcus. I plugged them in and clicked play. The sound of a sterile hospital room filled my ears. The steady beep of a heart monitor, the gentle hiss of an oxygen machine. And underneath it all, another sound. Click, 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 click. It was clearer now, without the wind and the fire to obscure it. Sharper, more confident. Alex was at it again. Chloe's voice came on the recording, a hushed, clinical whisper. He's been asleep for 3 hours. Vitals are stable. Temp is normal. But this started about 20 minutes ago. It's faster than before. More. Insistent. I grabbed a pen and a notepad, my hands trembling slightly. I started the audio file from the beginning and began to transcribe, my mind racing to keep up with the quick, sharp taps. The code was cleaner now, the pauses more defined. This was not the halting, confused message from the first night. This was a flood. The letters came fast. N-O-T, S-L-E-E-P, A-L-W-A-Y-S, W-A-T-C-H, F-R-O-M, I-N-S-I-D-E. My breath hitched. It was a continuation of the first message, but the tone had shifted from fear to a kind of desperate exposition. Felt like a warning not for himself but for us, for anyone who was listening. The tapping continued, relentless. I scribbled frantically, the words filling the page. C-A-M-E-F-R-O-M-R-O-C-K W-A-I-T-S-I-N S-I-L-E-N-C-E W-A-I-T-S-F-O-R T-H-E-W-E-A-K came from the rock. Waits in silence. The words from the hiker's blog post echoed in my mind. A profound and hostile intelligence in the rocks themselves. The old prospector's story. It was all starting to connect, forming a terrifying mosaic. I kept listening, transcribing. The message grew more detailed, more horrific. I-F-E-L-L-B-R-O-K-E-L-E-G-L-A-Y-I-N-S-H-A-D-O-W-O-F-T-H-E-T-E-T-H. The teeth. He was talking about the peaks. The name from the hiker's blog. He was confirming the location. C-O-L-D. C-R-E-E-P-I-N-G. N-O-T. F-R-O-M. S-N-O-W. F-R-O-M. T-H-E. G-R-O-U-N-D. I-N-T-O. M-Y. B-O-N-E-S. He was describing an entity, something that lived in the rock, in the ground itself, something that had found him when he was at his most vulnerable. The next part of the message made me drop my pen. This was no delusion. This was an abduction of the soul. An ancient, silent thing from deep within the mountain had found a vessel. It had hollowed him out, silenced his voice, and replaced it with its own silent, stony song. Alex wasn't the one tapping. Alex was the prison. The thing inside him was the warden. But the prisoner had found a way to communicate, a tiny act of rebellion using the last thing he had control over, the muscles in his jaw. I felt a surge of nausea. We hadn't just rescued a man. We had brought this thing down from the mountain. We had delivered it to a hospital full of people. Weak people. Sick people. The message wasn't done. The final part was the most chilling of all. Learning. LearningHowToWalk. LearningHowToWalk. The last two words were tapped with a speed and ferocity that was shocking. Kill me. It was a plea. Command. The ultimate act of self-sacrifice from a man who knew he was already lost. The audio file ended. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat at the table, the notepad full of my frantic scrawl in front of me. The story was there. A story of a parasitic geological consciousness. A predator made of silence and stone. My phone buzzed. A text message from Chloe. Did you get it all? The tapping just stopped. He's awake. The nurse said he's watching her. A new text came in a second later. She said he smiled at her. A real smile. I stared at her words on the screen. It was learning. Learning how to use its new body. Learning how to mimic human emotion. The vacant stare was a disguise. The silence was a weapon. It had been observing us all along, from behind Alex's eyes. And now it was in a hospital, surrounded by hundreds of potential new homes. My duty had not ended when that helicopter took off. It had just entered a new, terrifying phase. We hadn't saved Alex Thompson. We had potentially doomed everyone he was now in contact with. I looked at my own gear, packed and ready by the door. Then I looked back at my notes. The plea. Kill me. I woke Marcus. I didn't need to say much. I just showed him the notepad. He read it, his face grim, the color draining from his cheeks. He looked at me. We have to go back, he said. It wasn't a question. We weren't going home. We were going back to the city. We had to get to that hospital. We had to finish the rescue we started on that mountain. And I had a sickening feeling that finishing it meant honoring a dying man's last, desperate request. The drive back to civilization was a descent into a different kind of wilderness. We left the silent, snow-covered peaks behind, trading them for the blur of asphalt and the scream of tires on pavement. We broke every speed limit. Marcus drove, his face a grim, granite mask, his knuckles bone-white on the steering wheel. I was in the passenger seat, my phone clutched in my hand like a talisman, a fragile lifeline to the only other person who was witnessing this madness unfold in real time. That lifeline was Chloe. She had become our eyes and ears inside the hospital. Her initial, clinical detachment had completely evaporated, shattered by the relentless clicking from her patient's teeth. It was replaced by a cold, professional urgency that I recognized. It was the focus of someone who knows they are dealing with something far outside the established protocols, something dangerous and unknown. He's been moved to a private room on the 4th floor, she reported over the phone, her voice low and tense, fighting to keep the tremor out. The doctors are baffled. His physical recovery is astonishing. They're using words like miraculous. The fracture is already showing signs of accelerated healing. Granulation tissue is forming at a rate they've never seen before. A miracle. The word sent a shiver through me. It wasn't a miracle. It was biology. Just not human biology. Whatever was inside Alex was repairing its new vessel with a terrifying, unnatural efficiency. What about his behavior? I asked. my voice tight, dreading the answer. "That's the part that's really unsettling them," she said. "He's become responsive. Not verbally, but he'll nod when asked a question. He makes eye contact. He even took some solid food this morning. The psychiatric team saw him an hour ago, and they've completely walked back the trauma diagnosis. They think he's just suffering from severe aphasia and is slowly coming back from a fugue state. They're optimistic." Optimistic. That single word filled me with a profound terror. They were walking into the lion's den, admiring its coat and calling it a house cat. They saw recovery. We knew it was an infiltration. And the tapping, Chloe? What about the tapping? There was a pause on the line. "It stopped," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Completely. It hasn't happened again since the long message he sent you last night. It's like now that it knows people are watching, it's decided to behave itself. It is learning me, learning how to put on the mask." The words from his Morse code message screamed in my head. It was adapting, evolving. The vacant stare had been phase 1. Simple occupation. The silence was a tool of observation. Now it was entering phase 2, mimicry, integration. We arrived at the hospital in the late afternoon. It was a sprawling complex of glass and steel, a monument to logic and science that scraped the sky. It felt like another planet compared to the ancient, brooding granite of the Knuckles. But I knew, with a certainty that made me sick to my stomach, that we had brought the mountain's oldest, darkest shadow here with us. Chloe met us in the bustling, brightly lit lobby. She looked exhausted, her eyes wide with a fear she was trying desperately to conceal beneath her professional composure. She handed us visitor passes without a word. "Room 413, she said, her voice low. "4th floor, West Wing. There's a nurse stationed right outside his door, but security is otherwise pretty lax. As far as they're concerned, he's a victim, not a threat." "What's the plan?" Marcus asked, his voice a low rumble. He had a small, heavy-looking duffel bag slung over his shoulder. I hadn't asked what was in it. I didn't need to. Marcus is a man who prepares for the worst-case scenario. "I don't know," I admitted, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. "But we can't let it leave this place. We can't let it get out of that room." We took the elevator up, the cheerful, tinny music a sickeningly ironic soundtrack to our grim procession. The 4th floor was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and floor polish, a sterile world of controlled healing. We found room 413 easily. A friendly-looking nurse sat at a small desk just outside the door, reading a magazine. She smiled warmly at us as we approached. "Here to see Mr. Thompson? I'm afraid he's had a very long day. The doctors want him to rest." "We're with the search and rescue team that found him," Chloe said smoothly, her role as a medical professional clicking back into place like armor. "We just needed to drop off some of his personal effects that we recovered from the site." It was a plausible, simple lie. The nurse nodded, satisfied. "All right, but please just for a minute. He really needs his quiet." "Oh, he's had his quiet," I thought, a cold knot tightening in my gut. We walked into the room. It was a standard private hospital room, bathed in the soft, gray light of the late afternoon filtering through a large window that looked out over the sprawling city. There was a single bed, an array of silent medical equipment, and the quiet, almost imperceptible hum of the building's life support systems. And in the bed, propped up by pillows, was Alex Thompson. He looked better, impossibly better. The gaunt, hollowed-out look was gone. His cheeks had filled out. His skin had a healthy, vascular color. His broken leg was encased in a large, white cast, resting on a pillow. If you didn't know his story, you would think he was just a man recovering from a nasty, but entirely ordinary hiking accident. but his eyes gave him away. They weren't vacant anymore. They weren't staring into nothing. They were sharp, intelligent, and intensely focused. As we entered, they moved from Chloe to Marcus, and then they settled on me. And he smiled. It was the same smile Chloe had described on the phone. It was technically a perfect smile. The corners of his mouth turned up in a gentle curve. The skin around his eyes crinkled in just the right way. It was a flawless imitation of a warm human smile, but it was utterly, terrifyingly empty. There was no warmth, no joy, no emotion behind it whatsoever. It was a mask made of flesh, worn by something that had only just learned how to operate the muscles beneath. "Alex," Chloe said, her voice trembling almost imperceptibly. "It's Chloe, the paramedic from the mountain. How are you feeling?" He didn't respond with a word. He simply held her gaze for a moment, then gave a slow, deliberate, and utterly convincing nod. This was it. The creature. The thing from the stone. It was here, looking at us, assessing us, from behind another man's eyes. It knew who we were. It knew that we had received the messages from the prisoner. The desperate transmissions tapped out by the real Alex had been an act of treason. And the new king was now holding court with the traitors. I felt a strange pressure begin to build in the air. It wasn't a sound, but a feeling. A low, thrumming sensation that I felt more in the fillings of my teeth and the bones of my skull than heard with my ears. It was a deep, subsonic vibration that seemed to emanate from the bed. From him. A song of stone and deep earth. Alex's last message. This was it. This was the song. It wasn't melodic. It was a presence. A feeling of immense weight and ancient geological pressure. The feeling of being at the bottom of the ocean, of being buried alive under a mile of rock. My head began to ache, a dull, insistent throb right behind my eyes. I glanced at Marcus. His jaw was clenched, a vein pulsing in his temple. He felt it too. The thing in the bed just kept smiling its perfect, empty smile. His eyes never left mine. It was a silent challenge. A cold, clear declaration of dominance. This body is mine now. The mind you spoke to is gone. There is only me. I had to try. I had to know if any part of the real Alex was still in there, listening. "We got your message," I said, my voice low and steady, ignoring the sharp, questioning look from Chloe and the sudden tightening of Marcus's grip on his bag. I spoke directly to the smiling man in the bed. "We heard you. We're here to help." For a split seconda nanosecond, the smile faltered. A flicker of something else crossed his face. A spasm of confusion, of pain. His eyes blinked rapidly, and his jaw muscle, just beneath the skin, gave a single tiny, almost invisible twitch. Click. It was a single, defiant tap. So faint it was barely audible, almost lost in the hum of the room. A dot. The letter E in Morse. Was it the start of a word? Help me? Get me out? Or just a final, fading echo? But as quickly as it came, it was gone. The placid, horrifying mask of the creature slammed back into place. The pressure in the room intensified dramatically. The thing in the bed slowly, deliberately, lifted its human hand, and raised a single finger to its lips in a clear, universal gesture. Shoo! It was telling me to be quiet. It was warning me. The prisoner had just been caught trying to communicate, and had been silenced. And then the most terrifying thing of all happened. The silence was broken. It spoke. The voice that came out of Alex Thompson's mouth was not his own. It wasn't human. It was a dry, rasping sound, like stones grinding together deep underground, like the shifting of tectonic plates. It was a voice that was ancient and heavy and filled with a cold, patient malice. It spoke a single word, a gravelly utterance that seemed to physically press down on us. Leave. The word hung in the air, impossibly heavy. It was a command backed by the weight of a mountain. My knees felt weak. My head swam. The primal, instinctual urge to flee, to run from the predator in the room, was overwhelming. Chloe stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with pure terror. Marcus took a half-step forward, his hand instinctively moving towards the zipper on his duffel bag. But I knew we couldn't. We couldn't fight it here, not like this. We were out of our element. This wasn't the wilderness where the rules are simple. This was a place of laws, of witnesses, of consequences we couldn't begin to imagine. The thing in the bed watched us, its smile gone, replaced by a look of cold, reptilian appraisal. It knew it had won this round. It had revealed its voice, it had demonstrated its power, and it knew with absolute certainty that we were helpless to act. "We're going," I said, grabbing Marcus's arm, my own voice sounding thin and weak in the heavy air. I pulled him and Chloe out of the room, past the oblivious nurse who was now happily scrolling on his phone. We didn't stop moving until we were back in the sterile brightness of the hospital lobby. We stood there for a moment, gasping for air as if we had just surfaced from a deep, crushing dive. The subsonic pressure was gone, but a phantom echo of it remained, a ghost vibration in my bones. "What was that?" Chloe whispered, her face pale, her scientific certainty shattered. That voice. "That was the song," I said, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. "That's what Alex was talking about. The Song of Stone." Marcus looked at me, his face a thundercloud of grim understanding. "It's stronger than we thought," he said, his voice a low growl. "Much stronger and smarter. It's not just hiding anymore. It's showing off. It's in control." He was right. Our window of opportunity, if we ever truly had one, was closing with terrifying speed. The thing inside Alex Thompson was consolidating its power, growing more comfortable in its new skin. It was learning how to speak. Soon it would have mastered walking on its newly healed leg. And then it would walk right out of this hospital, wearing the face of a miracle survivor. And Alex's final, desperate plea echoed in the silence between us. No longer a message, but a terrible looming question. "Don't let it out. Kill me." Our rescue mission had become a hunt, and our prey was wearing the face of our victim. The hours that followed our retreat from room 413 were the longest and bleakest of my life. We found a dingy 24-hour diner a few blocks from the hospital, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and the lingering, greasy smell of stale coffee. It was an island of mundane reality, a world away from the cold, clinical terror we had just faced. We slid into a corner booth, the three of us, bound together by a terrible, unspeakable secret. The question hung unspoken in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. What do we do now? Chloe, ever the scientist, was desperately trying to fit the experience into a logical framework, to rationalize the irrational. "Mass hysteria," she murmured, stirring her untouched coffee with a plastic stick. "A shared auditory hallucination, triggered by extreme stress and the power of suggestion. The subsonic frequency. It could be from the hospital's HVAC system, a resonance we're not used to. That voice." She trailed off, the explanation falling apart even as she tried to build it. She couldn't convince even herself. "That was not the HVAC system," Marcus said, his voice flat and hard as iron. He had his heavy duffel bag on the seat beside him, a silent, ominous presence. "And that was not Alex Thompson. Chloe, you saw its eyes. It's a predator, plain and simple. It's just wearing a very, very clever disguise." "So what do we do?" Chloe's voice cracked, her composure finally breaking. The medic who had faced down a raging storm on a mountainside was now facing a terror she had no protocol for. Call the police? Call the CDC? What do we say? Hello? There's a sentient geological entity possessing a hiker on the 4th floor? They'd lock us up in a padded room. She was right. We were completely and utterly alone in this. We were the only 3 people on the planet who knew the truth, a truth so outlandish, so insane, that it was indistinguishable from madness. We were the sole guardians of a secret that could potentially threaten countless lives. I pulled out the notepad, my hands unsteady. The pages were now filled with my frantic transcriptions of Alex's desperate messages. I smoothed it out on the sticky tabletop and read them again. A final testament from a man already buried in his own mind. Came from rock. Waits for the weak. Took my voice. It is learning me. Don't let it speak. Don't let it out. And then the final terrible command. Kill me. His instructions were clear. He had known, even in his final moments of lucidity and control, what was happening to him. He knew what this thing was and what it was capable of. In his last act of agency, he had sacrificed his own infinitesimal hope of survival for the safety of others. He had passed the responsibility, the terrible weight of this knowledge, to us. He asked us to do it, I said quietly, my finger tapping the last 2 words on the page. Kill me. Chloe physically recoiled as if I had struck her. You can't be serious, she whispered, her eyes wide with horror. That's murder. We're rescuers. We save lives, we don't take them. Her entire being, her entire professional and moral code, was built on one sacred principle. First, do no harm. What I was suggesting was the ultimate violation of that oath. Is he still alive in there? Marcus asked, his gaze locked on me. It wasn't a philosophical question. It was a tactical inquiry. Is there anything left of the man to save? I thought of the single, defiant click. The letter E. That tiny spark of the real Alex, still fighting, still resisting from the deepest dungeon of his own mind. Was it a final, desperate act of self-preservation? Or was it an affirmation of his last command? Yes. Kill me. I didn't know. I would never know. I think there might be a trace of him left, I said, the words feeling heavy and inadequate. An echo, but it's fading fast. The other thing, the thing wearing his face, is getting stronger. When it spoke, that voice felt ancient, felt powerful, like it's been doing this for a very, very long time. My mind flashed back to the old newspaper article. The prospector Jedediah Slade, from the 1930s, found mad, tapping out his own frantic code. How many others had there been over the centuries that we didn't know about? How many victims had this silent, stone-based predator claimed from the lonely places of the world? It would find a host, a weak or injured person. It would inhabit them, learn them, and then use them to walk back into the world of men. And then what? A horrifying thought bloomed in my mind, cold and sharp. What if its goal wasn't just to inhabit one person? What if it was looking for a new hunting ground, a new territory, a hospital filled with the sick, the weak, the vulnerable? It would be a paradise for it, a place where it could move from host to host, silently, undetected, leaving a trail of unexplained recoveries, sudden psychotic breaks, and tragic relapses in its wake. We cannot let it walk out of that hospital, I said, my voice hardening with a terrible resolve. I don't know how, but we have to honor his request. We have to contain this. Now. Containment might not have to mean that, Chloe pleaded, gesturing towards the notepad, still unable to say the word kill. Maybe there's another way. What if we could prove what's happening? What if we could record that? That voice? That pressure. It's too smart for that now, Marcus countered, his tone leaving no room for argument. It showed itself to us because it saw us as a threat. It was a display of power. It won't make that mistake again. To everyone else, it will be the perfect patient. It will smile and nod and follow instructions until its leg is healed, and then it will thank the doctors and it will walk right out the front door. And we'll be the ones who stood by and let it happen. He was right. The creature had played its hand, and now it would retreat into cunning silence, into perfect mimicry. It would wait us out. Time was on its side. Every passing hour, its grip on Alex's body and mind grew stronger, and the echo of the real Alex grew fainter, until soon, it would be gone forever. We sat in silence in that cheap diner booth, the three of us at a terrible crossroads. Down one path was our morality, our humanity, the core belief that you do not take a human life, no matter the circumstances. Down the other path was a terrible, silent duty, a responsibility placed upon us by a dying man to stop a monster we could never prove existed. The decision wasn't made with a vote or with an argument. It was made in the heavy silence. It was a slow, dawning acceptance of the horrifying, inevitable truth. I saw it in the grim set of Marcus's jaw. I saw it in Chloe's tear-filled eyes as she finally gave a slow, defeated nod. Her soul rebelled against it, but her logical mind understood the terrifying calculus. The life of the one for the potential many. How? She whispered, her voice a ghost of itself. Even if we how, there's a nurse at the door. There are security cameras in the halls. We can't just walk in there and... Marcus, silent until now, reached down and slowly, deliberately, unzipped the duffel bag on the seat next to him. Inside, nestled amongst some spare clothes, was not a weapon of violence, but something far more subtle and far more insidious. Several small glass vials of a clear liquid, a handful of sterile syringes, and a small box of medical-grade potassium chloride. Chloe stared at the contents, her face ashen. "Where did you get that?" "From our own advanced field medical kit," Marcus said, his voice calm and even. "It's used in extreme cases for animal tranquilizing. In a high enough dose administered directly into the bloodstream, it stops the heart. It's painless, fast, and, if administered through an existing four-line, it's virtually untraceable in a standard autopsy. It would look like a simple cardiac arrest. Something that wouldn't be entirely unexpected in a patient who has undergone such a severe physical and psychological trauma." My stomach turned over. He had been thinking about this since we left the cabin. He had seen the endgame long before Chloe or I were willing to accept it even as a possibility. He had prepared for the unthinkable. The plan formed in the silence. It was simple and it was monstrous. Chloe, the trusted medical professional, would create a diversion. She would draw the nurse away from the station with a fabricated medical emergency elsewhere on the floor. Marcus and I would enter the room. I would be the distraction. I would be the one to talk to it, to look into those empty eyes one last time, to hold its attention. And Marcus, quiet and efficient, would administer the dose into the 4 bags injection port. We would be in and out in less than a minute. It was a perfect, terrible plan. A rescue mission twisted into its dark, horrifying opposite. We weren't saving a man from the mountain anymore. We were saving the world from the man we had rescued. We drove back to the hospital. The city lights, once a symbol of safety and civilization, now seemed harsh and alien. Every person I saw on the street, laughing, talking on their phones, living their ordinary lives, was completely oblivious to the silent predator sitting in a room on the 4th floor. A predator we were about to either unleash upon them or entomb forever in the body of a man named Alex Thompson. As we walked back through the automatic glass doors of the hospital lobby, I felt the full weight of Alex's last message. He had entrusted us with the most awful of tasks. He had trusted us to be strong enough to do what he no longer could. We stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, sealing us in with our decision. The quiet ascent to the 4th floor felt like a journey to our own personal hell. I looked at my reflection in the polished steel doors. The face that stared back was a stranger's, grim and 10 years older than it had been that morning. The bell chimed softly, announcing our arrival on the 4th floor. The doors slid open. It was time. It was time to answer the final, desperate tap of the man from the mountain. It was time to silence the Song of Stone, once and for all. The hallway on the 4th floor was even quieter than before. The night shift had taken over, and that deep, hushed stillness of a hospital after midnight had fallen over the wing. A different nurse was at the station outside room 413, a young man who looked half asleep, idly scrolling through his phone. We approached, our soft-soled boots making no sound on the polished linoleum. Chloe took the lead, her face a perfect mask of professional concern. She was back in her element, playing a role she knew by heart. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and steady. "I was just down in the ER, and they said there was a request for a cardiac consult up here? For a patient named Miller? Room 419. The nurse looked up, blinking, pulled from his digital reverie. "Miller? No, Miller was discharged this afternoon. There must be a mistake in the system." "Oh, that's strange," Chloe said, feigning the perfect amount of professional frustration. "The new system has been a mess all day. Could you just double-check the discharge logs for me? My supervisor will have my hide if I miss a consult." It was a masterful piece of social engineering. Plausible, professional, and just inconvenient enough to be completely believable. The young nurse sighed the universal sigh of the overworked and underpaid, swiveled in his chair to face his computer terminal, and began typing, his back now completely to us and, more importantly, to the door of room 413. Okay, let me see what I can find." That was our signal. Marcus and I moved past him, silent as ghosts. I reached for the door handle, my hands slick with sweat. I pushed the door open just enough for us to slip through, then closed it gently behind us, not letting it latch, leaving it resting silently against the frame. The room was dark. The only light came from the faint, orange glow of the city lights through the wide window and the green and red pinpricks of light from the silent medical monitors. He was there, in the bed, and he was awake. He wasn't sleeping. He wasn't lying down. He was sitting bolt upright, his back perfectly straight, and he was staring directly at the door. He had been waiting for us. In the dim, shadowy light, his face was a pale oval, his eyes two dark pools of cold, reptilian intelligence. The empty, horrifying smile was gone. In its place was an expression of pure, calm, absolute awareness. It knew exactly why we were here. The subsonic pressure slammed into us the instant we entered the room. It was back, but 100 times stronger than before. It was a physical assault, a wave of silent, crushing sound that vibrated in my teeth and made the air feel thick and viscous, hard to breathe. It was the mountain's true voice, the undiluted song of stone, and it was screaming at us in a frequency we could not hear but could absolutely feel. My job was to distract it. I took a step forward, my legs feeling like they were wading through wet cement. Marcus moved like a phantom to the other side of the bed, his movements fluid and precise, his entire focus on the four-stand that stood next to the bed like a silent metal tree. "Alex?" I said, my voice coming out as a strained, cracking whisper. I tried to focus on the man, on the prisoner trapped inside, not the thing that was looking out through his eyes. "We're here," This is the only way. The thing in the bed tilted its head, a slow, curious, almost bird-like gesture. It was a look of analytical contempt. It wasn't afraid. It was intrigued. It seemed to be studying my fear, my resolve, tasting the emotions in the room like a connoisseur sampling a rare vintage. Then, its gaze shifted, moving past me, locking onto Marcus. Marcus had the syringe in his hand. He had uncapped the needle. The small glass vial of potassium chloride glinted in the faint light from the monitors. The pressure in the room spiked to an unbearable level. The monitors by the bed, silent until now, began to flicker and protest. The steady, rhythmic beep of the heart monitor sped up, becoming erratic, panicked. Beep 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 beep. The thing in the bed opened its mouth, and this time, it wasn't a single grinding word that came out. It was a torrent. The voice, that horrifying, geological sound, filled the room, but it wasn't speaking English. It was a cascade of guttural syllables, of deep, resonant tones and sharp, glottal clicks. It was a language as old as the rock from which it was born. It was the true, unfiltered sound of the Song of Stone. It was a curse, a threat, a raw sonic command to stop. Marcus flinched, the sound a physical blow. His hand hesitated for a fraction of a second, but his resolve was made of iron. He ignored the sound and reached for the injection port on the 4-line. And then the impossible happened. Alex Thompson's body, the body with the shattered leg, encased in a massive, heavy cast, moved with an impossible, explosive speed. It threw itself sideways in a violent, thrashing motion. The metal force stand crashed to the floor with a deafening clang. The syringe flew from Marcus's hand, skittering across the linoleum and into the darkness under the bed. The thing was on the floor now, screaming, a continuous stream of its alien, stony language. It was propped up on its elbows, its useless, cast-bound leg dragging behind it like a dead weight. But it was moving. With horrifying strength in its arms and torso, it was dragging itself towards the door. Don't let it out. The command burned in my mind. Marcus lunged, grabbing its shoulders, trying to wrestle it back, to pin it down. But it was unnaturally strong, possessed of a strength that a man in that condition should not have. It twisted in his grip, and its face, the face of Alex Thompson, contorted into a mask of pure, inhuman rage. I was frozen for a second, my mind reeling from the sheer violence of it all. Then my training, my instincts finally kicked in. I dropped to my knees, scrambling for the fallen syringe. My hand swept the floor in the darkness. My fingers brushed against it. I grabbed it. I turned back to the struggle. The thing was on top of Marcus now, its hands clamped around his throat. Marcus was gasping, his face turning a dark, dusky red. It wasn't trying to escape anymore. It was trying to kill. I didn't think. I acted. I lunged forward, and I plunged the syringe not into an 4-line, but directly into the creature's thigh, into the exposed, powerful muscle of its good leg. I slammed the plunger down, emptying the entire vial of potassium chloride directly into its system. For a moment, a terrifying moment, nothing happened. It continued to choke Marcus, its eyes, filled with an ancient, geological hatred, boring into mine. And then its body went rigid. A violent shudder ran through it from head to toe. The grinding, alien voice cut off mid-syllable. The hands around Marcus's throat went limp. The thing in Alex's eyes looked at me, and in that final, silent second, the mask of the monster fell away. The cold, ancient intelligence vanished. The rage, the hatred, the alien presence, it all drained away like water into sand. And what was left was Alex. Just Alex. His eyes were clear. The prisoner was looking out for the first time and the last time. There was no fear in his eyes. There was no pain. There was only gratitude. A profound, silent, heartbreaking thank you. He opened his mouth one last time, and from it came not the song of stone, not a click or a tap, but a single, faint, human breath of a word. Thank you. And then his eyes rolled back in his head. His body went limp. The heart monitor, which had been screaming its shrill alarm, flatlined into a single, continuous, piercing tone. Silence. A true and final silence. It was over. The door burst open. The young nurse stood there, his face a mask of white, slack-jawed shock, with Chloe just behind him. His eyes took in the scene, the overturned forestand, Marcus on the floor gasping for breath, me kneeling over the still body on the floor with an empty syringe clutched in my hand. There was no explaining this. We were caught. It was over for us, too. But then one last impossible thing happened. From the body on the floor, a fine gray dust, like powdered stone or fine ash, began to seep from its pores, from its skin, its mouth, its nostrils. It rose in a faint, shimmering cloud, hanging in the air for a moment like a heat haze. It had no substance, no smell. It was just an essence, the essence of the thing we had just killed. The dust swirled in the still air of the room, and then, as if drawn by some invisible current, it drifted towards the open window. It flowed like smoke, passing through the fine mesh of the window screen as if it wasn't even there, and dissipated into the endless night sky over the sleeping city. The thing from the mountain was gone. All that was left was the body of Alex Thompson, a hiker who had died on a cold, sterile floor, miles from the wilderness that had first claimed him. And the three of us who were left to face the consequences. We spent the next 14 hours in a sterile, windowless police interrogation room. We told them a story, a carefully constructed version of the truth, repeating it over and over again until the lie began to feel more real than the horrifying memory it was meant to conceal. We told them that the patient, Alex Thompson, had suffered a severe psychotic break, a violent reaction to his trauma. We told them that he had attacked us, that we had been forced to restrain him for our own safety and his. We told them that in the struggle, his heart, already weakened by days of exposure and injury, had simply given out. We said nothing of the voice that sounded like grinding stone, nothing of the crushing pressure in the room, nothing of the final, impossible cloud of gray dust. And we said nothing of the empty syringe. They didn't believe us. Not entirely. I could see it in their eyes. Our story was plausible, but it was also full of holes that you could drive a truck through. But what could they do? The autopsy supported our version of events to a point. The official cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. The toxicology report found nothing unusual. The potassium chloride, administered directly as it was, had been absorbed and dissipated by the body's own systems, leaving no trace. The young nurse's testimony was a confused, panicked blur of alarms and shouting. And we were rescuers, men and women with impeccable records, dedicated to saving lives. In the end, with no clear evidence of foul play and a story that was, on paper, medically and legally plausible, they had to let us go. The official report would list the death of Alex Thompson as a tragic consequence of his traumatic ordeal. A sad but explainable footnote in a hospital's long and complicated history. But we knew the truth. We carry it with us still. We never spoke of it again. The three of us. The bond we had forged in the wilderness, a bond of trust and shared experience, had been replaced by a different kind of bond. A shared, terrible secret, and it was too heavy to carry together. We went our separate ways. Chloe transferred to a medical unit in a different state, as far from the mountains as she could get. She needed a world of predictable science, of illnesses that could be found in textbooks. She needed to forget the sound of that voice. Marcus retired a few months later. He bought a small plot of land in the flatlands of the Midwest, far from any rock or mountain. He said he wanted to spend his time growing things. I think he just needed to be somewhere the ground didn't feel like it was listening. And I'm still here, still walking these trails, still listening to the language of the wilderness. But I listen differently now. The silence no longer feels empty. Sometimes on a quiet night, when the wind blows just right against the high granite peaks of the Knuckles, I think I can feel it. A faint phantom pressure in the air. A ghost of a vibration in my bones. It's the echo of a song that has been silenced. It's a reminder of the ancient, patient things that sleep in the heart of the earth. Waiting. Waiting for the lonely. Waiting for the weak. Waiting for the next broken body to fall in their shadow. We carry the echoes of the choices we make. My choice, our choice, was to honor the last message of a man I never truly met. A man who used the final spark of his will not to beg for his own life, but to protect the lives of strangers by tapping out a warning from the deepest prison of his own mind. In my book, that makes him a hero. And we were his unwilling and perhaps unworthy instruments. The official story is that Alex Thompson died of a heart attack in a hospital bed. But I know the truth. He died on that mountain under the shadow of the silent teeth. He died the moment a cold and ancient thing crept out of the stone and stole his voice. What we did in that hospital room, that wasn't an act of violence. It was a mercy. It was the final, silent rescue. So when you go out into the wild places, listen. Listen to the wind. Listen to the rustle of the leaves. Listen to the silence. But if you ever find someone who has brought the silence of the deep earth back with them, listen closer. Because you might just hear a message tapped out on a frequency of fear and desperation. A final plea from a prisoner of stone. And you will be faced with a choice. Thank you for joining us at the Wilderness Protocol. Be safe out there. Be smart. And respect the silence. If you have a story you think we need to hear, our contact information is in the description below. And if you want to support the channel and ensure these stories continue to be told, please consider liking this video and subscribing. Every bit of support helps. Until next time.